Hey everyone, welcome to Sophia and Theo. Today we're diving into a literary classic, Candide by Voltaire. This novel might seem like a light read, but it's actually packed with sharp satire and deep philosophical questions.
Okay, so we've all been there, right? Staring down one of those so-called classics that feels more like, homework than an actual book you'd want to read for fun.
It's true.
But let me tell you, Voltaire's Candide.
Yeah.
This one's different.
Right.
It's satire, it's philosophy, and it's actually funny.
Mhm.
Like surprisingly funny
Yeah.
for, something written so long ago. It's
Yeah.
like a roller coaster ride through like all the big philosophical questions of life.
You're spot on. And what's so remarkable is how Candide still manages to feel like relevant even centuries after it was written.
Right.
Even these excerpts that we have
Yeah.
from this Project Gutenberg edition, they're just excerpts. Right?
Yeah.
But even with that, and they have this like really interesting introduction, by the way.
Yes.
Even with just these pieces, we get a taste of Voltaire's like timeless wit and his social commentary, which is amazing.
That introduction, speaking of, that really caught my attention because it's almost like Voltaire is like poking fun at the very idea of even like summarizing a story as wild and unpredictable as Candide.
Totally. Yeah, it's a very deliberate choice, I think.
Okay.
Voltaire uses that that chaotic energy of the book to like challenge this whole concept of the best of all possible worlds.
Right.
They even compare, in the introduction, they compare summarizing Candide to making a plaster cast of a dance,
Oh, wow.
which is like,
trying to capture something that's so fluid and lively and put it in this like static, lifeless form.
exactly.
Oh.
And that's kind of how he tackles philosophy itself. It's with this wit and energy, this refusal to be like,
Pinned down.
pinned down by like rigid thinking.
Right, yeah. And then we meet Candide.
Right.
Talk about being thrown into the deep end of life, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the introduction, it points out how Voltaire, he finds humor, right?
Yeah.
By taking these characters who start out ridiculously privileged.
And then just like sending them tumbling down the ladder of misfortune.
Right.
It's great.
It's a brilliant satirical tool. He takes these characters who are like at the top, right?
Yeah.
And then just watches them, kind of fall.
Yeah.
And by doing that, he exposes all the flaws in societal structures. Like, he doesn't even need to dwell on, like, realistic suffering.
Right.
He just highlights the absurdity of it all.
Right.
And by doing that, he's really showing how ridiculous some of these systems can be.
And he holds nothing back. I mean, he even mentions like Cunegonde and her servant.
Oh, yeah.
And they're both claiming these like outrageously noble lineages.
Right.
As if being born into privilege somehow makes them like better than everyone else.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the thing. That's Voltaire, like, poking fun at that blind optimism.
Okay.
The tendency to cling to these illusions of grandeur.
Right.
It's like, he's showing us how some people, especially those in power,
We'll just completely ignore the very real and often harsh realities of the world around them.
they're just so blinded by their own like sense of importance that they don't even see it.
Exactly.
It reminds me of that saying, like, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yes, that's it. Voltaire wants us to question those assumptions,
Yeah.
And he does it with such comedic genius. Like even the introduction talks about like the speed and the energy of his writing.
Wow.
How no one, even like a century later, could match his pace.
Speaking of keeping pace,
Right.
it's amazing how Candide still feels so relevant.
I know.
Like centuries later.
It's amazing.
The introduction even mentions how it's inspiring satirists today
Yeah.
who are tackling like new faiths and ideologies. Does that really hold up though, like in our world today?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Voltaire's work, it's like a master class in like dismantling power structures.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what form they take, whether it's the church, the military, or like any modern day ism that claims to have all the answers.
Right.
Voltaire teaches us to question everything.
He really does. Well, he definitely puts that whole questioning thing into overdrive in the actual excerpts.
Yeah.
I was kind of honestly shocked by all the terrible things that happen to these characters.
It takes turn.
It does, yeah. Like everything from absurd military training to, well, let's just say things take a dark turn.
Yeah. They get pretty dark.
They do. They get pretty dark.
But that's Voltaire using hyperbole.
Okay.
He takes things to the extreme
Right.
because he wants to expose how absurd the world can be Like he's trying to shake us out of our complacency.
Right.
He's like, look how ridiculous this is. How can anyone just accept things the way they are when there's so much chaos?
He has a point.
Right.
He does.
And he does it with this like incredible comedic timing. You know, even in the darkest moments, he finds the humor, and it makes the satire even more powerful, I think.
I guess like he finds a way to make us laugh, even if it's a slightly uncomfortable laughter.
Right.
At things that are actually like deeply unsettling.
Right. Because sometimes laughter is the only way to confront those really uncomfortable truths.
It's true. It's true. And then there's Pangloss.
Oh, Pangloss. Yes.
Who seems to represent this like almost impossibly optimistic worldview.
Yeah.
Even after like facing hanging, dissection, like slavery.
It's a wow.
He still clings to these beliefs.
I know. Is Voltaire suggesting that like any philosophy, when you take it to that extreme, just becomes absurd?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think with Pangloss, what he's doing is he's specifically targeting this philosophy of Leibnizian optimism.
Okay.
Which is this idea that we live in, you know, quote unquote, the best of all possible worlds.
Right, right.
And by having Pangloss just like cling to this idea of pre-established harmony, even when everything around him is proving otherwise.
Voltaire is really highlighting the danger of blind faith in any system, any ideology. It shows how we can become like blinded to reality when we just cling to these comforting beliefs.
So it's not just about questioning like the systems themselves,
right,
but also about examining our own beliefs and how we hold on to them.
Exactly.
Even when they might not be serving us.
Yeah. Blind faith in anything, no matter how good it sounds, can prevent us from really seeing the world clearly and making like informed choices about our lives.
And that brings us to what might seem like a very different message. It's this idea of finding meaning in, you know, simple work.
Yeah.
In like cultivating our own gardens rather than chasing power or abstract ideals. Does that feel out of place after such a like chaotic and philosophical journey?
Not at all, actually. I think what's so fascinating about it is this really reflects Voltaire's own life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because like he wasn't just a philosopher.
Right.
You know, he was a man of action. Like he built his own estate. He experimented with agriculture. Like he was very into, you know, tangible, practical pursuits.
So it's not about just like ignoring the problems of the world, but like, okay, the world's messy and complicated, but like, what can I do? I'm going to focus on what I can control.
Exactly. You find that meaning within that imperfect world.
Okay.
And that's what he's saying is like that ending, it's open to interpretation for sure. But I think ultimately he's encouraging us to find that purpose in our own actions.
Right.
Rather than just passively accepting these systems or philosophies that are flawed. It's a call to action.
Okay.
You know, be active participants in shaping our own lives and the world around us.
Which is, it does feel very practical after like this wild philosophical ride. It's like, okay, we've looked at all the absurdity and the chaos and the things we can't control.
Right.
So now what? Like, what can we actually do about it?
Exactly. And that's where, like, you know, you were saying about the action.
Yeah.
Like that engagement.
Right.
It starts with us. It starts with those choices.
Okay.
Our actions.
That's a really powerful message.
It is.
It is. But, you know, part of me still wonders, can a story this absurd, this over the top, actually like change how we see the world? Or is it just like brilliant entertainment?
Right. And that's the question I think every reader is left with, right?
Yeah.
What I think is so fascinating is that Voltaire uses humor as this tool for social critique.
Right.
He takes things to these extremes, and by doing that, he forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths.
Right.
They're too ridiculous to ignore.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe laughter is a form of philosophy, like a way to open our eyes to these absurdities that are all around us.
Laughter is philosophy.
Yeah.
I like that. But let's dive into some specifics here from these excerpts.
Okay.
We've talked about, you know, Pangloss. Yeah. And his like unshakable optimism.
Yes.
But one character story like really resonated with me.
Okay.
And that's the old woman.
Oh, yeah.
Who travels with Candide and Cunegonde.
Right.
Talk about a life of misfortune.
Oh, my gosh. Her story is, it's the perfect example of how Voltaire uses hyperbole to expose just like the cruelty and absurdity of the world.
Right.
He puts her through wars, slavery, natural disasters, you name it, she's been through it.
It's like, it's everything.
I know, and yet she still manages to find this this resilience.
Yeah, it's like he's reminding us that even in the face of like unimaginable suffering,
Yeah,
the human spirit, the will to keep going, it can endure.
exactly. And notice how he frames her story too.
Okay.
She's like on a ship,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And she's telling her tale to Cunegonde,
Right.
who is busy complaining about her own misfortunes.
Of course, yeah.
Right. It's like he's saying, look, everybody's got their own burdens to bear.
Right, right.
And yours might seem really big to you, but like there's always somebody out there who's experienced worse.
It's a good reminder, like, check your perspective a little bit.
Right.
It's so easy to get caught up
It is.
in your own bubble and forget that. Like, other people are facing things that are, like, way tougher than what you're dealing with.
Exactly. And Voltaire challenges us to broaden that perspective.
Okay.
To look beyond our own immediate experiences and just recognize how vast
Yeah.
the spectrum of human experience really is.
And he definitely does that with the whole section about El Dorado.
Oh, yes.
Talk about a utopia. Everything's
Okay.
made of gold and jewels, and
I know.
the people are kind and generous, and there's no poverty, no conflict. It's like it's like a fantasy world.
It's a fantasy. It's like a fantasy world's come to life.
It is. It's crazy.
But it's not just a whimsical fantasy.
Okay.
Like El Dorado serves a purpose
Right.
in Voltaire's satire.
Okay.
By showing us this ideal society, he's implicitly critiquing
Right.
the flaws of the real world.
It's like he's holding a mirror up to our own societies and saying, look, like, this could be us.
Totally.
What are we doing? What's holding us back?
Yeah, he's asking us to really examine the structures and the systems
Okay.
that shape our world and ask ourselves, do these things actually serve us?
Right.
Or could there be a better way?
And it's so interesting how Candide and Cacambo, they choose to leave
Right.
El Dorado.
I know. Why would you leave paradise, right?
Like, why? It's perfect.
I know. But that's a crucial point because Voltaire isn't advocating for escapism.
Okay.
He's not saying go find a perfect world and just stay there.
Right.
He's suggesting that the real meaning, the fulfillment, comes from engaging with the world as it is,
Okay.
even with all of its imperfections.
Right.
El Dorado's like this thought experiment.
Okay.
It's showing us what's possible, but it's not meant to be like a permanent solution.
So we can't just like run away from all the problems
right.
of our own societies. We have to be a part of making them better.
Exactly, which brings us back to cultivating our own garden, right?
Right, right.
It's about finding that purpose and that meaning within our own little sphere of influence.
Okay.
No matter how small or seemingly insignificant it might be.
Yay.
Even those small acts of creation or connection,
Right.
making things a little bit better, those can have a ripple effect.
It's a call to action. It's a reminder that we all have like a part to play
We do.
in making things better, even if it's just focusing on your own little corner of the world.
And that is a message that I think is just as relevant today as it was back then, because
Right.
we're facing new challenges, new uncertainties.
Right.
It's easy to feel very overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah.
But Voltaire reminds us that we have a choice. We could either be swept along by the current of everything that's happening, or we can choose to swim against it,
Right.
create our own meaning and purpose.
So even in the face of all this absurdity and chaos,
Yeah,
we still have the power to choose how we respond.
we do.
Speaking of absurdity,
Yeah.
there's one more scene I got to ask you about. Remember that scene at the Venetian Inn
Yeah,
where Candide, he meets all those
Oh my gosh, yes.
dethroned kings,
Like that.
6 of them, right?
It's like walking into a very strange history lesson.
It is.
Right. Like all these
Yeah.
figures from history.
It's like, what are the odds?
I know, right?
All in one place.
And what's so fascinating about that is Voltaire uses them to make a point about power
Okay.
and how fleeting it is.
Okay.
You have these guys who once ruled entire empires,
Right.
kings.
I know. And now they're practically they have nothing.
Yeah.
They're reduced to just sharing these stories of all their misfortunes over dinner. Yeah, it's like a reminder that no matter how high you climb, right?
Right.
All the wealth, the status, whatever, you're still vulnerable.
You are. Fate can take it all away
Exactly.
like that.
Wow.
It's a little chilling.
It's a little chilling.
It makes you think.
It does. It does. And speaking of, things being taken away,
Yeah.
Candide goes through a lot in this.
He does.
He is constantly
I know.
being robbed and imprisoned, shipwrecked, like you name it.
Yeah, it's like every
It
time
happens to this guy.
he catches a break and then
I know.
something terrible happens.
Yet through it all, there's this like little flicker of optimism
Yeah.
that never really goes out.
It's true. Like, no matter what gets thrown at him, he's still kind of, like, bounces back.
He does, yeah. And that's a really interesting part, I think, of Voltaire's, like, satire, right?
Nope.
Because Candide represents that almost naive optimism that some people, they cling to it. They want to believe. Like, it's all going to work out.
Right, that there's a reason for everything.
Yeah, even when, like, everything is telling you otherwise.
Exactly. And he's constantly being confronted with, like, the worst of humanity.
Right.
The worst that the world can throw at him, but he's still holding on to those Panglossian ideals.
He seems almost, like, willfully blind to all the suffering sometimes. Like, how can you not see
I
this?
said, come on, wake up. But I think that's the point.
Okay.
Like, Voltaire's not saying we should be pessimists,
Right.
but he is advocating for, like, a healthy dose of reality.
Okay, so, like, see the world as it is.
Yeah, acknowledge that suffering exists,
Yeah.
injustice exists, but we don't have to let that, like, crush us.
Okay, so it's like finding that balance, right? Like, don't ignore the bad stuff.
Right.
But don't let it, like, destroy your hope for a better future.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that brings us back to that idea of cultivating our own gardens. It always comes back to that, yeah.
It does, because it's about finding that contentment, finding that purpose, not in these, like, grand schemes.
Right.
Or trying to obtain all this power, but in, like you said, just tending to our own little corner of the world.
Yeah, finding that satisfaction in the everyday,
Yes.
working towards something meaningful, even if it's just on a personal level.
Exactly. And I think, that's something that's just as powerful today as it was, hundreds of years ago.
Totally.
Like, we live in a world that feels oftentimes very chaotic.
Right.
Overwhelming.
Yeah.
And, Voltaire's reminding us that we have a choice, we have that agency, we can either get swept up in it all,
Right.
or
Right.
we can focus on what we can control, our own actions, our own relationships,
Yeah.
our own little contributions to the world.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
And he delivers it with,
Yeah.
such wit and, like, absurdity.
Well, that's the thing about Voltaire, right? He'll make you laugh,
Yeah.
and then, right,
Will make you think.
it sticks with you, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for our listeners out there, if you are looking for a book that is thought-provoking,
Yes.
hilarious, and ultimately, I think, very uplifting,
Absolutely.
pick up a copy of Candide. You might be surprised
You will be.
how relevant it still is today.
And, as you're on that journey with Candide, through all the ups and downs,
Right?
keep Voltaire's lens in mind.
Okay.
Question everything.
Right. Yeah.
Challenge your assumptions.
Yeah.
And never underestimate the power of laughter
I love that.
to expose absurdity and inspire change.
Who knows? You might even feel inspired to cultivate your own garden.
Maybe.